I'm Natalie Jackson from the Global Ethical Finance Initiative, and it's a pleasure to be joined here today by two great guests, Najmuddin, who's CEO of BIMB Investment, and Ndako, Head of Investment and Research from Lotus Capital. And we're discussing the topic of integrating ESG and the SDGs in Islamic asset management. So the UN SDGs provide a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future. They recognise that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. We've seen engagement by Islamic finance institutions with ESG and SDGs through different products, as well as United Nations initiatives, such as the Principles for Responsible Investment and the Principles for Responsible Banking. Both Islamic finance and the SDGs strive to have a positive impact on society. The Islamic principles of stewardship, fair play, and shared prosperity are aligned well with the SDGs. So now I'll hand over to our guests to hear more about their work. Firstly, I welcome thoughts on your experiences of integrating ESG and the SDGs in Islamic asset management. So let's hear from Najmuddin first. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Natalie. It's a great pleasure to be in today's session, and we'll be happy to share our experience in integrating ESG and sustainability in our Sharia investment process. Before that, I'd just like to share with everyone BIMB investment journey. How did we get started in ESG investing and integrating with Sharia? Let me just share with you a presentation slide. So we started back in 1993 as a full-fledged Sharia fund management company, full-fledged Islamic asset management company. So over the years, we've just been focusing on Sharia investing, from 1993 to 2013. But in 2015, we decided to explore ESG and sustainability and how we'll be able to integrate in our Sharia investment process. And in 2015, I think there's also encouragement from the regulators in Malaysia, particularly the Securities Commission as well as the central bank. There were already active discussion on sustainability and ESG. That provide, in a way, the support, for fund manager like us to look at sustainability. And we are fortunate that we're able to engage with Arabesque Partners. That's a UK-based asset manager, and we realized that Arabesque asset management or Arabesque Partners actually have the leadership when it comes to sustainability and ESG. I'm sure many have heard about Arabesque S-Ray, which is an ESG screening tool. So back in 2015, so when we engaged with Arabesque and they have the capabilities of assessing securities, companies looking from the ESG lens, and we realized that we're able to integrate in our already existing Sharia investment process. And we formed a partnership back in 2015. And from that partnership, we launched the first global Sharia ESG equity in Malaysia. And that particular fund now, it's been around for more than 5 years. And from then on, we have been in partnership with Arabesque ever since 2015. And since then, we've launched the world first global ESG Sukuk fund, which now is also the largest global sukuk in Malaysia. And we have launched an Asia-Pacific equity ESG Sharia fund in also Malaysia. And just recently, we launched another global Sharia ESG fund. So in total, we have about 7 ESG funds today. So we are very clear about the positioning of our company, our fund management company. that we want to be we are very conscious and we are very clear that we will continue to integrate ESG in our ESG screening in our investment process, which is also why back in 2019 we also signed the United Nations backed Principle for Responsible Investing, UNPRI.
Fantastic. That's great to hear, and amazing to hear that you've launched the world's first of many things, or for the region, and that's fantastic. So over to you, Ndako, in terms of your thoughts on Lotus Capital around integrating ESG and the SDGs into your business and products.
All right. Thank you, Natalie. It's definitely a pleasure to be on this panel and to be participating in the event. Even by way of a background for Lotus Capital. Lotus Capital is primarily an asset management company. We've been operating since 2006 in Nigeria, providing share compliant asset management services. Now, at the time that we started in this market, the concept of Islamic finance was, if I can use the word, not very well known, if I can use that word. So we did a lot of work in trying to promote Islamic finance as a concept, get adoption by regulators as well as customer bases for Islamic finance products. What we did find was that there was a good reception for these services because the population as well as the economy was very receptive to the concept that aligned with improving financial inclusion, in promoting economic growth, being a developing market like ours. So what we did was start out with a mutual fund in about 2008. And that was the first non-interest is the word that we use for Islamic finance. So that was the first Islamic finance or Islamic mutual fund in our market. The offer was hugely successful. And part of the reasons was that there were a number of people who had not participated in the formal conventional or formal financial markets because of concerns around faith and inclusion. And when they saw this product, they engaged with the market for the very first time. So we're talking about people who never had a bank account, people who never had a custodial arrangement, people who didn't have insurance services, and they were coming in through the markets through the asset management windows. On the back of this, we tried to increase the amount of products that were in our market. We worked very closely with the stock exchange, the Nigerian Stock Exchange, to develop the first Islamic index in this market. Thankfully, from the screening and exercise that we conducted, most of the companies that came into the index about 2012 were companies that produced annual sustainability reports. In terms of their spread, industry spread, we had companies that were in the telecommunication sector, companies that were in the industrial goods sector, and in terms of size, these companies constituted about 50 or more than 50% of our index coverage in terms of market capitalization. So that helped us, begin to see some appreciation for sustainability reporting within the Islamic finance space. Further to that, sometime around 2016 or 2013, actually, what we saw was that there was a lot of investor appetite toward more fixed income type of investments. And so what we did was work with the state governments, the municipalities at the time, to try and encourage them to adopt Islamic finance for social products. So the first sukuk that was issued in Nigeria, which we advised on, was used to construct school buildings. If you follow the story of our market, you'll know that in terms of education were considered to have one of the highest levels of out-of-school children, somewhere around 10 million in sub-Saharan Africa. So the provision of educational facilities was very novel. This sukuk was used to construct about 11 schools across the southwestern region, and it led the regulator at the time to develop sukuk-focused rules. Because we had the funds that we have garnered via the asset management business, we're able to get investors into the sukuk program. The sukuk and its impact when the schools were eventually constructed, and we began to see the higher numbers of attendance within the schools, we saw increased interest from the sovereign, and that's the Nigerian federal government, in sukuk issuance because of the nature of infrastructure financing that it can achieve. So what we did was advise the government at the time to use sukuk to construct roads across 6 geopolitical zones. Now, the way the country is structured, is structured across various regions, and some of these regions are highly dispersed in terms of geographical locations. The road networks, the bridge networks are very critical in connecting major cities, in enhancing trade, and obviously in raising economic prosperity. So they bought into this idea of having sukuk. They issued the first sukuk. They constructed about 35 major road projects across the country, and the uptake was quite good. Subsequent to that, in 2018 and 2020, they continued on the back of this to provide additional infrastructure. At the last count, they had constructed over 44 roads using sukuk, just to try and bridge the infrastructure gap that we have. Because the sukuk was successful in the asset management business for Islamic finance, actually, we saw that when we started this journey, we had about the one asset management fund that was skewed towards Islamic finance, but now we have about 10. Importantly, about seven of those happened in the last 3 to 5 years. And the reason that we attribute this to is the conventional space began to see how investors were appreciating the benefits of Islamic finance, not just in terms of returns from the funds that were being generated, but in terms of how the assets were being utilized and the amount of impact that it was having in the economy. And so those investors began to engage more closely with the conventional financial institutions, and they started developing Islamic funds. So this is a strategy that we think is going to continue to drive growth in our market. We're beginning to see pension funds also beginning to adopt Islamic asset management practices. And that started as recently as the middle of this year. So we're very hopeful that will be a big growth driver in our market.
Yeah, fantastic. It sounds like you're doing great work with the sukuks. Really good to hear. So to talk about then Islamic finance and the principles, Ndako, you mentioned kind of financial inclusion and things like that. Welcome thoughts around the alignment between Islamic finance and the principles and the sustainable development goals. So Najmuddin, if you could comment on that first, and just welcome both of your thoughts.
The notion of sustainable development is considered as a response to the human need to balance environmental protection, with a social economic development. SDGs investing and Islamic finance focuses on their impact on society and may converge with each other. The main focus of Islamic social finance is to eliminate poverty and do welfare for the humanity that are perfectly matched with the aim of SDGs. Innovations in the use of Islamic financial instruments can go a long way in supporting the SDGs, the areas where Islamic finance can maximize its contribution to the development of, for example, like zakat and wakaf. It's like, in giving and endowments, sukuk financing, for example, green sukuk, sukuk for financing solar energy and so forth, and also social microfinancing. Malaysia has demonstrated leadership in establishing the enabling environment for Islamic socially responsible investing, or SRI, and green finance that are in line with SDGs. Over the years, Malaysia has introduced several initiatives on sustainable finance to support the green agenda. In 2014, the Securities Commission formulated Malaysia's social responsible investment sukuk framework, under which Malaysia issued its first green sukuk in 2017. The Environmental, Social and Governance ESG Index, FTSE4Good, was introduced in 2014. In 2015, Bursa Malaysia's Sustainability Reporting Framework was introduced. In 2018, the Securities Commission of Malaysia launched the guidelines of sustainable and responsible investment funds. And recently, in November 2020, the Securities Commission of Malaysia have launched the Waka Featured Fund Framework. The framework aims to facilitate the offering of Islamic funds with Waka features to enable the growth of the Islamic social finance segment. The development of Waka was identified as one area of significant potential for social development, greater public good, and wealth distribution. BIMB investment in supporting all these initiatives, the regulative initiative has been the first ever asset management company in Malaysia to have introduced a Waka featured mutual fund. It's called Makmur My Waka Fund. The fund is ESG compliant and gives out half of the return to Wakaf on a monthly basis, which combine the two components of ESG and Islamic social finance. And this contribution, half of this contribution, actually goes to, for example, to fishermen who wants to build ships, in the East Coast. And some of the funds also went to dialysis center, for people who can't afford, to do dialysis, for their kidneys. So this is how Wakaf, be able to, I think Wakaf is in line with the SDG goals. It is our belief that the Wakaf Fund, Makmur My Wakaf Fund, is an inclusive economic instrument based on philanthropic value. It aims to provide all members of society, particularly the underserved, access to quality essential services in fulfilling the needs of the community towards shared prosperity. We believe that Wakaf has great potential in developing the economy and can have an overall positive and sustainable impact on the Malaysian economy, the global economy, the community, and also the environment. As mentioned earlier, we believe there is alignment between Islamic capital market, Islamic finance, and socially responsible investing, or SRI. SRI exhibits several similar facets with Islamic finance. Both SRI and Islamic finance are values-based approach and strong on risk management. Collaboration between SRI and Islamic finance ecosystems would likely sharpen both sides' intellectual position, as well as offering broader opportunities for distribution and knowledge sharing across regions.
Okay, thanks, Najmuddin. That's useful insights around the alignment. Ndako, would welcome your thoughts on the alignment between the SDGs and Islamic finance, and also if you've come across any challenges around the two.
All right, thank you, Natalie. And I do agree with Najmuddin as to how aligned Islam is with the SDGs. And I say this understanding that the definition that we give to the SDGs as being a universal call to action to end poverty, to protect the planet, and generally to ensure that everybody, all people, regardless of where they may be, enjoy peace and prosperity. So if we look at that definition of the SDGs and we contrast or compare that with Islam, many believe that Islam is also universal in its approach. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is considered to be making a universal call to humanity. And the Islam as a word, the root word of Islam being salama, is peace, peace and submission to God. So if we look at the universal call and the peace and submission, we do see that there is, in definition, a natural alignment between the SDGs and Islam. If we look at the higher objective of the SDGs being this peace and prosperity, we can say that is the Maqasid of the SDGs, and that is allowed in Maqasid Sharia. And so what are the how do we identify the key things on the Maqasid Sharia? So we know that it includes the protection of faith, life, lineage, intellect, and property, towards ensuring that humanity, thrives, and there is a normal functioning society. And I think when we see these objectives aligned, it's easy for people or proponents of Islamic finance or customers of Islamic finance to easily, by engaging with Islamic finance, find themselves supporting the SDGs implicitly just by that participation. And there are various ways that we can see this happening. If we look at corporate organizations that are operating in line with the principle of Islamic finance, a lot of them are encouraged to contribute zakah, to take out zakah from their earnings. Now, zakah, as a purification of these earnings, is a way of mobilizing financing specifically for socially responsible projects. In terms of just how much this can potentially bring in into the market, if we look at what the ISDB or the Islamic Development Bank estimates, we're looking at somewhere around $1 trillion in terms of global zakah assets annually. If we look at other types of institutional organization of social Islamic social finance, if we look at Waka, for instance, we're looking at upwards of 100 billion in assets that can be mobilized towards social projects just by abiding by the principles of Islamic finance, which, like I said, are perfectly aligned. So in my mind, I don't see many challenges between the integration of these two systems. I actually see, like Najmuddin said, that we will eventually see a very clear convergence between the two.
Do you feel the Islamic finance industry is ahead of conventional finance, and is the kind of lessons from Islamic finance that conventional finance can learn? So Najmuddin, I'd welcome your thoughts first on that.
Sharia and ESG are complementing each other, as there is alignment between Islamic capital market, Islamic finance, and sustainable and responsible investments, as both are value-based and, like I mentioned, strong on risk management. Hence, we believe investors are well received of Sharia ESG fund. We strongly believe that collaboration between the SRI and the Islamic finance ecosystem would likely sharpen both sides on the intellectual position, as well as offering broader opportunities for distribution and knowledge sharing across region.
So I think maybe I'll look at our markets as well in responding to that. So if we look at the way Islamic finance has evolved in this market, I'd say as far as social financing is concerned, we can put ourselves slightly ahead. And that's because the focus of Islamic finance in this market, at least, has been this thing around nation building, economic growth, financial inclusion. That has been the, how I put it, that has been the presentation, the driving force of its growth in this market. Not so for conventional finance. Although we've seen a number of corporates incorporating in the conventional space the principles of responsible investing. Even for those that haven't incorporated within the Islamic finance space, they have inadvertently, done these things. So we've seen monies being invested via the Islamic finance space in sustainable projects such as clean energy. We've seen the provision of educational facilities. We've seen even sponsorship of women entrepreneurs, businesses that support women entrepreneurs to reduce gender inequality. We've seen the provision of infrastructure. All these things happening purposefully through Islamic finance vehicles. Not entirely the case in the conventional sector.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, no, that's really interesting. I'm very aware of time, so I think maybe if we could close with a comment from each of you, maybe one top tip for Islamic finance asset managers who want to integrate ESG and SDG. So to Najmuddin first.
Yeah, firstly, I would say that most Islamic fund managers, they understand, they already have, they understand the Sharia investing process, the screening and the rule book is there. It's just that when it comes to ESG, you don't have one common standard like Sharia. So that's very important. So I think for any fund managers, especially Islamic fund managers wants to integrate ESG, they need to be able to assess the ESG framework, importantly, the integrity of the ESG assessment or the ESG ratings, and the ESG data.
And Ndako, your one top tip?
I would advise Islamic asset managers to just go to the core of Islamic finance and see just how it resonates with the SDGs. Coming from the kind of market that we are in, it's easy to see all the development indicators that the SDGs is trying to find. And it's a clear time frame. So the SDGs are trying to get us somewhere by 2030. If we look at indicators such as hunger, for instance, or poverty, or inequality, or even climate, these are things that I can say from Nigeria, for instance, that we see seriously. We see issues of insecurity that have arisen on account of climate issues and water conservation that hasn't happened very effectively. So if you ask me, Islamic asset managers, Islamic finance institutions should actually be at the forefront of SDGs. It shouldn't be something that we have other institutions encouraging you to adopt. You should be the one driving the SDGs, because you can see just how it resonates with the core of Islam. And like I said, it's about economic and prosperity and peace for everyone.
Fantastic, and I think that's a great point to finish and conclude conversations. So I'd like to say thank you very much to Najmuddin and Ndako, and thank you for your time and your fantastic insights.
Most welcome.